Welcome to History's Shittiest Disciple, and today we're going to be talking about two different fallacies, but it's actually just one fallacy particularly. And we're going to be talking about, first, cliches, and what are cliches before we can actually talk about this fallacy. So, what is a cliche? And there's a few different definitions we can go down. A phrase or opinion that is overused and betrays lack of original thought. Now, you can think of quotes from famous philosophers to many different things that are very intelligently articulated. It might not require much intelligent thought to just rephrase something that someone else has said. We're going to take a look at one more definition. A phrase or an idea that has been used so often that it no longer has much meaning and is not interesting. So, there's a few different definitions of cliche. One of which is it can lose its meaning, one of which is it's overused and has lack of original thought. So why is this important? Why am I bringing this up? Well, there's a very common fallacy that I see people using. It's called the thought-terminating cliche. So this is very common, but I don't see very many people talking about this fallacy. A thought-terminating cliche, also known as semantic stop sign, thought stopper, bumper sticker logic, or cliche thinking, is a form of loaded language often passing as folk wisdom, intended to end an argument and quell cognitive dissonance. Its function is to stop an argument from proceeding further, ending the debate with a cliche rather than a point. Some such cliche are not inherently terminating. They only become so when used intentionally to dismiss dissent or justify fallacious logic. So you might be thinking to yourself, this sounds kind of like a red herring. A thought-terminating cliche is actually under the faulty generalization fallacies. It took me a while to get my head wrapped around it. I thought it was a red herring fallacy, but just think of it like this. It's no different than any other generalization fallacy in the sense that it's saying something that could generally be true, but it's not necessarily true, and it's using a cliche to quell cognitive dissonance in an argument or a discussion. So, with that being said, let's look at some examples. Lies of the devil. Stop thinking so much. It's all good. Here we go again. So what? I think a really good one to tackle is stop thinking so much. Thinking too much could generally be a good thing and it could generally be a bad thing. It's something that people might think generally has some wisdom, but it's a generalization that really has no real point in an argument unless you can actually expand on it to make a good point. Thought-terminating cliches can be perhaps maybe used in different manners, and they be used in different mannerisms. Somebody can use it as a generalization and then move on to a red herring. But it's someone stating a generalization to try and dismiss something at first. I think that is the essence of what a thought-terminating cliche is. So if we go up to who created it, the term was popularized by Robert Jay Lifton in his 1961 book, Thought Reform and Psychology of Totalitarianism, who called the use of cliches along with loading the language as language of non-thought. Because in order to quell cognitive dissonance, it makes sense to me intuitively how it could benefit a totalitarian government. Robert Jay Lifton also popularized the term doubling, which was actually coined by a Nazi doctor, if you've listened to me have debates on the subject of veganism. I think it's time to move to the next very related fallacy. I'm entitled to my opinion. A person discredits an opposition by claiming that they are entitled to their opinion. That is the short definition under the red herring list of fallacies on Wikipedia's list of fallacies. If we look at the actual article itself, I'm entitled to my opinion. I'm entitled to my opinion, or I have the right to my opinion, is an informal fallacy in which a person discredits an opposition by claiming that they are entitled to their opinion. The statement exemplifies a red herring or thought-terminating cliche. The logical fallacy is sometimes presented as let's agree to disagree. Whether one has a particular entitlement or right is irrelevant to whether one's assertion is true or false. Where an objection to a belief is made, the assertion of the right to an opinion sidesteps the usual steps of discourse of either assertion, a justification of that belief, or an argument against the validity of the objection. Such an assertion, however, can also be an assertion of one's own freedom from or refusal to participate in the rules of the argumentation and logic at hand. So basically, somebody can use this to try and derail from what the subject is originally meant to be about. So I could say, well, if somebody gave me an argument, I could more or less give a position, I can give my position and then try to change the subject at the end of it by saying, well, it's also my opinion. Someone could just as easily make a statement in order to dismiss and quell a discussion and cognitive dissonance, like a thought-terminating cliche, by saying, let's agree to disagree, or I'm entitled to my opinion. Someone could just as easily give a generalization and stop the conversation there. A very important point which I'm trying to make here is when we're talking about the subject of cliches and common sayings, things that are commonly said or things that we commonly believe, it's important for us to not only define our terms, but to also challenge what has been commonly said or what we commonly believe. I would like to give some examples with modern cliches of a thought-terminating cliche. So imagine if there is a progressive person or left-leaning person who's arguing to someone who had a different belief system. And if the person who had a different belief system, someone who's right-leaning, moderate, whatever, or maybe just somebody who disagrees with them who's also on the left, if that person responds with, that's just SJW nonsense, that's a thought-terminating cliche. If the whole point of that is to terminate thought and to quell the conversation. Another example could be, imagine if, let's say, there is somebody who has a bias for women's rights and for women's status in society. And if they're talking to somebody who's concerned with men's rights and men's issues. And if the person who's concerned with men's rights or men's issues brings up a particular subject of men's inequality, if the person who had a bias for women's issues responded with, that's just incel nonsense. The problem I have with that is, once again, that's a thought-terminating cliche. It's become a bit of a cliche to call people who are concerned with men's rights as incels. No different than it is to refer to left-leaning people or people with progressive ideals as SJWs. A cliche or a generalization or some sort of buzzword or some sort of idea that we have in our head that we really didn't quite define to actually be consistent, it can express itself in many different fallacious means. A thought-terminating cliche is one of them. And I think a very important big take-home is many different sayings, many different means of conveying ideas can turn into a cliche over time. And once a narrative has been established with a generalization of a certain title or tag, and when we apply it to people or situations, it can easily turn into a thought-terminating cliche. And even though there might be examples that are not on the Wikipedia page of thought-terminating cliches, anybody can create a cliche over time. A question to the audience: the common phrases, sayings, buzzwords, cliches that you all use, do they inspire thought on average, do you think? Or do they terminate thought? Let me know down in the comments section down below. Make sure somebody's not using an appeal to emotion or some other form of generalization or some other fallacy before you accuse them of committing a thought-terminating cliche. Go to the definition and make sure that it is a thought-terminating cliche. So with that being said, have an amazing 24 hours.